3 things I want you to consider before you make the decision to buy a property. Whether you are buying this property for investment purposes or you're buying it for residential purposes. And I know you've probably heard this all your life, that buying a property is the best, investment decision you can ever make under the sun. And that, yes, of course, property as an asset is something that you definitely need to have as part of your overall investment strategy, right? And then there's also some narratives around, girls with title deeds and the fact that, when you are renting, you are wasting money, you're throwing money away, you're actually sponsoring someone to build wealth, by paying their bond on their behalf. And finally, that it is actually cheaper for you to buy than it is to rent. So on this video, I'm just going to show you 3 major things that you want to consider before you make this decision. My name is Tendro and I am your financial coach. All right, let's begin. So the 3 considerations that I want us to talk about today are: number 1, psychological factors to consider before you make the decision to buy a property, financial factors, and obviously we are going to basically focus this video towards the financial factors because in as much as psychological factors are important and they are noteworthy and but at the end of the day, I feel like, the numbers must make sense, because I don't want you to ever be in a situation where you have more house than money. I would rather you have more money than house. And lastly, we're just going to talk about opportunity cost consideration. So psychological factors that I want you to consider, and remember guys, these are worth taking note of. They are important, but I feel like in the order of things, you want to obviously prioritize the financial factors, or rather the financial considerations, before you make the decision to buy a house. So when it comes to psychological factors, the things that obviously come to mind initially is the fact that, you've got certainty. You've got certainty. You also have, comfort and even pride in knowing that this is our home, or this is my home. It became even more important for us when we became parents to actually be able to have a place where, even our children can point and say, that's my home, or that's our home, right? So the pride, the comfort, and the certainty that comes with home ownership, right? And I think the other thing that is even more important or worth noting is the fact that when you know that this is my house, right, you don't have this lingering stress around the fact that one day, the landlord is going to come and decide that actually, no, we are in that situation right now with our property back at home because we've had so much drama with tenants. We've had so much drama with estate agents. We just feel like, this is a very stressful asset to have at this point in time. We just want to sell, right? So if your landlord was to come to you and say, I've decided that I'm selling for whatever reason, right? Again, right, it gives you a lot of anxiety because you're thinking you've made the decision to stay here because you factored into that decision the fact that maybe it's within reach to your children's school, it's within reach to your work, it's within reach to the amenities that you are usually frequenting, right? So again, the stress that comes with moving, looking for, a property to stay in, again, which fits into your profile, right? The profile that you have built in terms of staying where you are staying right now, as well as just the cost of moving, right? And also, let's also not forget that when you are moving, also there's a risk that things can get broken and all of that stuff, right? So you don't have that stress, you don't have that anxiety, you don't have those concerns when you are actually owning, right? And the other consideration is the fact that when you own, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want with this property, right? To a certain extent, I know there are landlords that are lenient. They can say that you can do this, and the other. But again, there are limitations because at the end of the day, it is not your house, right? So if you wanted, for instance, to have, a prettier paving, In most instances, or rather a walkway into your house, in most instances, you can't do that because it is not your house. I say, how? Do you get what I'm saying? You can't even, what do you call this? You can't even put on things on the wall or paint, as you want to. But when you own a property, if you wanted this wall off, you could even, you could even take it off if you wanted to. So those are just some of the things that, come with home ownership, or the advantages that come with home ownership, that I want you to think about, and that I want you to obviously factor in when you are making this decision to own a property. Then number 2 are the financial considerations, right? And I'm going to basically sit on this. We're going to spend a lot of time here, but I think where I'm going to focus our energy is around the operational costs, right? So there are 2 types of costs that I want to talk about when it comes to factoring in, the financial part that comes with making a decision to move from being a renter to a buyer, right? So there is number 1, what we know as closing costs or once-off costs, right? And I'm going to very quickly talk you through what those look like. And if you want the detail of that, let me know in the comment section if you would like for me to do a video on that. But I'm going to focus on the operational costs, right? The monthly costs, just so that once you are done listening to this video, you are able to know that actually it might not be the case that it is cheaper for you to own a property versus you actually renting a property. All right. So let's start off with the closing costs or the once-off costs. So number 1 is when you look at the once-off costs, right? It's very easy for you to look at the cost of the property. So on Property 24 on Rightmove, you're seeing that this property is valued at 500,000. We'll make an example with 500,000, right? So the other thing that you want to factor in is the fact that you don't have this 500,000, just as an example, right? So you're going to go into the bank and you're going to apply for financing, right? And because you are borrowing money, you are going to then be in an arrangement, in a credit arrangement called a bond or a mortgage, right? And because of that, guys, banks are not going to just borrow you money for free. They're going to charge you what is known as interest, which you are going to pay over the life of this credit agreement. I hope that makes sense. So already you can see that we are moving from 500 to 500 plus your interest, right? The other thing is that in order for us, for you to actually have this property in your name, so girls with title deeds or families with title deeds, right? We're going to have lawyers that are going to basically assist in this transaction of moving this title from the seller, registering it with the bank, and it being in our names, right? And the lawyers are going to do what? They're going to charge you again, right? Also, the government wants a piece of the pie, right? And this is known as transfer duty in South Africa and stamp duty in the UK, right? So again, this is where whenever you listen to, let's say, when the minister or the governor basically announces, the budget for the year, I'm always listening out for, the transfer duty or the stamp duty, because what you ideally want is them to continue to increase the threshold. So just as an example, in South Africa, when I bought my property, I bought it at around 850, and the threshold was that if you buy a house less than $1 million, so the million is the threshold, right? You do not pay transfer duty, right? So that's why it's important to listen out and read out on the stamp duty, because it helps you make a decision in terms of the value of the house that you want to buy, right? So yeah, so that's stamp duty, and that is basically a government tax, right? So there are transfer fees, also there are initiation fees. There's a lot happening in that closing or in those once-off costs, right? So we started off with 500,000 just as an example, and we could end up basically sitting with about 650 costs that are capitalized to the cost of actually owning this house. So that's just something to have in mind before you make the decision to say, I think I can afford a house that's 500. No, it is not 500. In actual fact, it's sitting at probably 650 or 700, right? So that's important to know and to consider. On the other hand is the operational costs, and these are the ones that I want to focus on, or the monthly running costs of actually having this, or rather owning this house. And what I thought would be valuable and useful for you guys was for me to basically compare what I am paying as the landlord, right, with the property that we have in South Africa, and what the tenant is paying, right? Just to dispel this thing of when you are renting, or rather renting is definitely much cheaper. So I'm just going to go to my screen so that I'm obviously not missing anything out, so that obviously this video is valuable for you. So let's start off with, maybe let me move this here. Let's start off, and I think it would actually be valuable if I just showed you the numbers as we are going through this video. So let's start off with the bond payment, right? So this is under my column as the landlord. So my bond payment, actually something again that's worth mentioning, right? Something that's worth mentioning, right? When I started paying for this bond, I was paying about probably 7,000, right, a month. But because of the interest rate hike over time, right, I'm now sitting at 9,000 Rand a month, right? And unfortunately, it has not been practical because of the climate that we find ourselves in and how properties are rated where we have bought the property. It has not been practical for us to transfer all of that to the tenant, right? So we are bearing the cost, and that's why we are probably as frustrated as we are with the price of the bond, right? So let's start off with the 9,000 that we are paying towards servicing this bond every single month, right? So that is my bond repayment. What is the tenant paying? The tenant is paying 6,500. Okay, then let's now move on to electricity. Electricity is not, for me, under my column, it would sit at 0, but this is just a cost that the tenant would incur. And guys, that's all. That is all the tenant is ever going to pay for staying in that property. So the 6,500, and maybe let's add 500 or 1,000 Rand. I'm not sure how much the electricity bill would be for her. And let's just say, for argument's sake, at most she's paying 7,500 towards staying in that home. But how much am I paying as a landlord? I'm starting off with that 900, which the bank wants every single month. And then also, because I understand risk and I understand that, we could die. So there's also credit life. So a life cover over, this credit agreement of about 500 that's going towards that. And then there's management fees. We don't live in the country. We need someone to do, the running around. If we don't have a tenant, someone to be vetting and all of that administrative stuff that we are actually not interested in. So again, we pay a fee to the management company to do the running around. So that's a cost, and it's usually a percentage, obviously, of the amount that they are collecting on our behalf from the tenant. And then there's rates and taxes from the city of Johannesburg. Again, very important. And then there are levies, which are so expensive. I think right now we're sitting at about 1,800, 1,900, right? Just for levies, property levies. So if you can imagine, the property is in an estate. So it's a gated estate. There is security all around. There's even a security guard in front. So that's what the property levies are actually there for, or there to service, right? There is nice pathways, there's paving. So all of those common areas that everyone has access to as a tenant, or rather, no, not as a tenant, as a landlord, I have to contribute to that, right? I have to contribute to even the, what is it called? The water bill that is used to water, the plants and the grass that my tenant is not even benefiting from, just as an example. So property levies is one of them, and it's a very big cost, especially for us. And then water, very minimal, probably 150 that I pay. So at the end of the day, I'm paying much, much more than the tenant, right? So I'm paying about just under 13,000 versus her who is paying basically half of that bill to basically stay in the apartment. So this, I think I shared just to give you value and a perspective of what it means to own versus what it means to rent. But I actually forgot one other thing. Very, very important part of also being a homeowner is the maintenance and the repairs part. Guys, this is another cost that can really yeah, like this is why emergency funds are important for stuff like this, because before you know it, they will be calling you, or they will be calling the state, the what do you call it? The estate agent or the management company, to say the taps are leaking, or there's something wrong with the bathroom or the showers. And then one that actually happened to us, which costed us so much money, was there was a time in these 5 years where there was like serious storms in Johannesburg, and the tiles on top came off, right? Obviously that's none of our business. The property company would need to pay for that, because that's not us, right? But what then happened is that because the tiling is now out of place, it's affecting the ceiling. Now the tenant is having to sit in a lounge, in a beautiful lounge with a brown mark on top, which is not nice. It's not as aesthetically pleasing, right, for the nature of the apartment that they were staying in. But also the water that was dripping from the ceiling is now also affecting the quality of the tiling on the floor, right? And you know who has to pay for all of that? Not the tenant. It is not the tenant's business to pay for that. It is my responsibility as a landlord. And these things you just never know when they will come, right? You just never know when there will be a repair that's needed, whether the stove is no longer working, or whether the bathroom needs, a plumber to come through. You just never know when those things are going to arise, or when those costs are going to arise, and you need to be able to respond to them, because it is whose house? It is your house. You are the landlord. The client is not going to be responsible for that. So that's just to say, these are the costs that you need to factor in when you are making the decision to buy versus renting. And the third consideration is opportunity cost, right? And the best and simplest way for me to explain what opportunity cost is, I want you to think about the fact that when you make a decision to use your hard-earned money, for instance, right, to buy an investment property, or a property for purposes of residential purposes, right, what you are also doing in making that decision is you are foregoing, right, the opportunity of using that money for something else, right? So in this instance, I'll make an example, because when we were buying for investment purposes, right? This investment property, when buying it for investment purposes, right? So I could have taken that 100,000, and instead of using it as a deposit to buy this investment property, I could have basically decided to invest in, let's say, shares, invest in ETFs, right? Just as an example, right? But having said that, right, it's also important to realize that when you're making these decisions, sometimes you don't have the benefit of hindsight like I do now, because where I'm sitting right now, I feel like I should have taken that 100,000 deposit that I put into that property, and I should have invested it into S&P 500, FTSE 100, as well as the top 40 shares, or rather ETFs, that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. That's just what I'm thinking in retrospect, right? But I decided instead to put that 100,000 towards a deposit to buy an investment property. And it just so happens that, and it's sad, right, that when I bought in 2019, and by the end of 2019, we were already experiencing COVID-19, right? And we all know the aftermath of that. People lost jobs. So this is not just affecting the landlord. This is also affecting the tenants. And over a period of these 5 years that we have had ownership, or rather home ownership, we have felt the pinch. Whenever the governor announces that there's going to be an interest hike, for instance, I'm just like cringing. I'm just like, oh my goodness, I probably would not be experiencing it that way, because we bought the property using debt, right? But whereas from a timing perspective, it was not the right time. But we also know that markets, it takes about 5 years for markets to correct themselves. So the past 5 years have been tough, but that does not necessarily mean that the next 5 years are going to be tough. And we also know that historically, the value of properties, do increase. So we are hoping that in the next 5 years, in the next in the next 10 years this investment would have been worth it. But that's just to say, guys, also factor those things in. Do your research. Don't wear that cap that says, investing in property is the best way for your money to grow. The other thing that I also want to mention is that also remember that the nature of this investment is not liquid, right? So you don't decide, like is the case with shares, that you're going to basically sell and have the money as you press the button, right? When it comes to home ownership, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait months and sometimes even years for you to sell the property and have the cash on hand. So that's just other factors that I want you to factor into as you're making this decision to buy or to invest in property versus other things or other assets that you could potentially invest in. Okay, and if this is your kind of content, please do let me know in the comment section which parts of this video did stand out for you. Let me know if you want me to do a deep dive into the initial costs of owning a property, if you are in that season of your life. And do not forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone in your circle whom you know will find it valuable. Thank you so much, and see you next time.